Good evening, and thanks for joining me. Tonight, we're diving deep into a story that's as baffling as it is tragic. The mid-air collision of a commercial airliner and a military helicopter. What makes this incident particularly unsettling is that it occurred in what's considered to be some of the most heavily monitored airspace in the world. So how could this happen? Over the next few minutes, we'll examine the evidence, analyze the facts, and try to make sense of this horrific event. We'll hear from aviation experts, listen to the chilling audio recordings, and explore the stories of those whose lives were forever changed on that fateful day. Let's get started. The first critical factor in this incident was the breakdown in communication between air traffic control and the pilots involved. We're talking about a system designed for redundancy, with multiple channels of communication and protocols in place for just such an eventuality. Yet somehow those safeguards failed. From the cockpit voice recorder of the commercial airliner, we can hear the pilots acknowledging their altitude and position to air traffic control. The transmission is clear, concise, professional. Moments later, we hear the air traffic controller issue a warning to the military helicopter, instructing them to adjust their altitude immediately. The tone is urgent, even frantic. But here's where the situation turns tragic. The helicopter pilot's response is garbled, almost unintelligible. It's unclear whether the problem was technical, human error, or a combination of both. Whatever the cause, those crucial seconds of lost communication would have devastating consequences. Experts believe that during those lost seconds, both aircraft were essentially flying blind to the other's position. The radar systems, while sophisticated, were not foolproof. And without clear and timely communication, the pilots were left to rely on their own eyesight in a chaotic and rapidly evolving situation. The transcripts reveal a series of increasingly desperate calls from air traffic control, each one unanswered by the helicopter. The commercial airliner, meanwhile, seems to have been unaware of the imminent danger. There's no indication of evasive maneuvers, no panicked calls to the tower. The sound of the impact is sudden, violent, and then an eerie silence. The investigation into the communication breakdown would go on for months, revealing a complex web of systemic failures and individual oversights. One theory suggests that the military helicopter was operating on a different radio frequency than the commercial airliner, leading to a fatal delay in receiving the crucial warning. Another line of inquiry focused on the training and experience of the air traffic controllers on duty that day, questioning whether they had the necessary skills and composure to handle such a high-pressure situation. Whatever the root cause, the consequences were undeniable. The communication breakdown exposed a critical vulnerability in our air traffic control system, a vulnerability that cost precious lives. Beyond the communication breakdown, investigators uncovered a series of equipment failures that further contributed to the collision. These weren't isolated glitches, but a cascade of malfunctions that, when combined, created the perfect storm for disaster. Let's start with the transponder on board the military helicopter. This device, essential for broadcasting the aircraft's identification and altitude to radar systems, was malfunctioning intermittently in the hours leading up to the crash. Maintenance logs showed a pattern of reported issues with the transponder, but for reasons still unclear, the helicopter was cleared to fly. This malfunctioning transponder meant that the helicopter was essentially invisible to certain radar systems, including the one being used by the air traffic controller responsible for that sector. This critical piece of information was never relayed to the pilots, leaving them with an incomplete and fatally flawed picture of the airspace around them. Adding to the technological chaos was a software glitch in the air traffic control system itself. This glitch, discovered during the post-crash investigation, caused a delay in the processing of radar data. While the delay was minimal, just a matter of seconds, in the high-stakes world of aviation, seconds can be the difference between life and death. The software glitch meant that the air traffic controller was working with outdated information. By the time the warning was issued to the helicopter, it was already too late. The aircraft were on a collision course, and the outdated radar data meant that the controller was powerless to prevent the tragedy. Furthermore, the commercial airliner's Traffic Collision Avoidance System, or TCS, also failed to prevent the disaster. This system, designed as a last line of defense against mid-air collisions, should have alerted the pilots to the impending threat and provided guidance on evasive maneuvers. However, investigators discovered that the TCAS on the commercial airliner was not properly configured to detect and respond to helicopters. It was a fatal oversight, one that would cost the lives of all those on board. The combination of equipment failures, from the malfunctioning transponder to the software glitch, and the misconfigured TCAS painted a disturbing picture of systemic vulnerabilities in the aviation industry. The investigation revealed a lack of oversight and accountability when it came to maintenance and safety protocols. It also exposed the dangers of relying too heavily on technology without proper safeguards and redundancies in place. The crash served as a wake-up call for airlines, manufacturers and regulators alike. In the aftermath of the tragedy, there were widespread calls for increased investment in aviation infrastructure, stricter maintenance standards and more rigorous testing of safety systems. The goal was clear: to prevent such a catastrophic failure from ever happening again. The investigation into the equipment failures would lead to significant changes in the aviation industry. As with any aviation accident, the investigation into this mid-air collision ultimately led to the human beings at the controls. While equipment malfunctions and communication breakdowns undoubtedly played a role, the question remained: could human error have been the deciding factor? The investigation revealed a series of misjudgments and oversights by both the pilots and the air traffic controllers involved. It wasn't a case of blatant negligence or recklessness, but rather a series of small errors, each seemingly insignificant on its own, that when combined led to a catastrophic outcome. Let's start with the pilots of the military helicopter. Experienced aviators with thousands of flight hours under their belts, they were nonetheless operating under challenging conditions. The weather that day was less than ideal, with low visibility and reports of turbulence in the area. Furthermore, the helicopter crew was operating on a tight schedule, adding an element of pressure to their mission. Investigators believe that this time pressure may have contributed to a sense of urgency, leading the pilots to take shortcuts and deviate slightly from their planned flight path. The air traffic controllers, on the other hand, were dealing with a heavy workload that day. The airspace around the airport was particularly busy, with multiple arrivals and departures happening simultaneously. This high volume of traffic placed a significant cognitive load on the controllers, potentially impacting their ability to process information effectively. Adding to the complexity of the situation was the fact that the air traffic control tower was undergoing renovations at the time of the accident. This meant that the controllers were working in a temporary facility, one that was smaller and less well-equipped than their usual workspace. The investigation revealed that the controllers were not adequately trained on the new equipment and procedures in the temporary facility. This lack of training may have contributed to communication errors and delays in responding to critical alerts. Furthermore, the investigation uncovered a culture of complacency within the air traffic control facility. Despite the high-stakes nature of their work, there was a sense among some controllers that accidents were rare and that the system was robust enough to prevent collisions. This culture of complacency may have led to a relaxation of safety protocols and a reluctance to speak up when concerns arose. In the aftermath of the accident, the Federal Aviation Administration launched a comprehensive review of air traffic control procedures and training programs. The agency implemented new guidelines aimed at reducing controller workload, improving communication protocols, and fostering a more proactive safety culture. The accident served as a tragic reminder that even the most experienced and well-trained individuals can make mistakes, especially when operating under pressure or in unfamiliar environments. The mid-air collision between the commercial airliner and the military helicopter was a tragedy on multiple levels. It exposed systemic weaknesses in our aviation infrastructure, highlighted the devastating consequences of equipment failures, and underscored the critical role that human decision-making plays in ensuring safety in the skies. But beyond the technical details and the investigations, it's important to remember the human cost of this tragedy. The passengers and crew on board those aircraft were mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, friends and colleagues. They had hopes, dreams, and loved ones who will forever grieve their loss. The investigation into this accident was long and complex, but it ultimately led to significant changes in the aviation industry. The goal was clear: to prevent such a horrific event from ever happening again.